Hi, I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. So, y'all heard the news yesterday. The verdict came down in the Sean Diddy Combs case. The music mogul was facing multiple charges, including sex trafficking and racketeering. He could have got life in prison just for that racketeering charge alone, but that's a sentence Diddy's no longer facing. For more on that, we have Taryn James, a journalist who's been reporting on this trial from New York City, and Jay Smooth, a hip-hop broadcaster who's also been closely following along. Taryn James, welcome to Commotion.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you both for being here. And before we get into this, I do want to say, I mean, this is a story that revolves around assault and sexual misconduct. So please use your discretion in terms of how you're listening to this segment. And Taryn, I mean, I'm going to start with you. In the end, Diddy, he was convicted for transportation to engage in prostitution on both counts, but he was found not guilty of sex trafficking and racketeering. So what is your reaction to that split verdict?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was a bit surprised, not even necessarily on the not guilty for the racketeering charge. That notoriously is a hard charge to prove, even for this prosecutor's office, which has done that time and time again. But the fact that he was found not guilty on these more serious charges was a bit shocking to me, especially considering the testimony that we heard from Cassie and Mia and Jane. It sounded like he, from their testimonies, saw his ex-girlfriends and his relationship with them more so as property and that he could control and manipulate and use whenever and however he wanted, rather than human beings and people. But more than shock, honestly, is disappointment. Like, yes, Diddy was acquitted of, these more serious crimes, but that does not mean that he is innocent of the alleged sexual abuse and coercion that these victims have accused him of, these victims on this trial and victims that have filed civil suits against him. This honestly is really telling for survivors, furthermore so that, hey, if you come forward with your abuse claims, the chances of you getting justice are actually slim.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to take in just in what you said there, and I know a lot of people are feeling the same way. Jay, I mean, was this in any way the verdict that you expected?
I mean, I know better than to have any firm expectations because any jury trial is so unpredictable by nature because it's made up of humans that are bringing all their human limitations to it. And with a case like this, unfortunately, the reality is we as a culture are just not there with understanding how abuse and exploitation of women really work. And especially with a jury that's predominantly male, predominantly middle aged, as a member of both of those groups, a lot of us have an ingrained bias, especially against women who are bringing accusations against powerful men. We're instinctively going to look for reasons to doubt her, question her motivations, look for reasons to say things like, I don't think she's so innocent. And unfortunately, this case had a lot of complexity and nuance that would open the door to indulging that kind of bias if you're inclined to do so. And I don't think the prosecution clearly did everything they needed to do to counteract that. So it's a deeply disappointing outcome, but I can't say it's surprising per se.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by what you said there about like the human limitation when it comes to the jury, because also, I mean, there's also just a kind of a legal limitation I think that's also in play here. I mean, because Taryn, I mean, we saw so many people have seen the really graphic video of Diddy assaulting his longtime partner Cassie. That 2024 video, though it came out in 2024, really blew open this Diddy scandal, and then of course everyone's become made aware of the sexual misconduct allegations he's faced. So in their minds, I mean, he's guilty. But, the concern that critics were pointing out early on around this case was whether the charges Diddy was facing actually lined up from a legal perspective, with Diddy's alleged and incredibly disturbing behavior. How do you think that might have kind of impacted the verdict that we got?
Yeah, definitely. I first have to echo everything that Jay said. I mean, again, this is such an incredibly nuanced and layered and complicated case to begin with, not only just on its face, but also you have this man who's a mogul and considered by so many a cultural icon who's been a household name since the 90s. He's literally at the center of it. But this isn't the first time, like I said, that this prosecutor's office has approached a case like this with a racketeering charge. I mean, if you take it back to 2022, they were successful in doing so with convicting R. Kelly, who faced very similar charges that Diddy did just now. And there, unfortunately, aren't a lot of options that prosecutors or victims and accusers have when it comes to the statute of limitations related to a lot of crimes involving sexual abuse, which is unfortunate because, like Jay said earlier, we know the years and the psychological toll that it can take for victims to even come forward or even identify that, hey, I think that I was abused and I need to get help and I need to report this to someone.
Hmm.
And I'm hesitant to say that prosecutors were totally flawed in their approach. I mean, obviously, they didn't prove without a reasonable doubt the things that they were trying to, but I more so believe that it's the system that failed these women more than just, this one entity.
Well, I mean, so then Jay, let me turn it to you. I mean, Taryn's saying that she's hesitant to pin this blame. I mean, blame is a strong word here, but to say that the prosecutors failed to do what they set out to do. But do you think that they maybe bit off more than they could chew within this system?
I mean, yeah, as she said, it's a tough situation because there's a long conversation we could have about the whole origins and history of the concept of racketeering. That history
Mm.
has a lot of racism genuinely embedded in it. People are right to be wary of that in general. This is also not the type of case that RICO charges are usually applied to. So I think it resulted in a somewhat convoluted case where the jury had to connect a lot of dots. And again, in order for them to connect those dots, they need a modern understanding of things like how consent works in a situation like this, the fact that the concept of consent does apply to people who do sex work. They need to understand the power dynamics of coercion in a situation like this, and that the victim could be getting some material benefit from the situation and be complicit in harm to others. And that doesn't mean that they weren't being violently coerced. That could be part and parcel with how it works. And I don't think we have legal remedies that are up to date with how these things work. And we have so much work left to teach each other how these things work that unfortunately it's probably always going to be an uphill climb seeking justice with a case like this.
Yeah, and I don't even think, honestly, that in this case it was even clear to the jury how we were defining coercion. I even think that, like Jay said, there's a lot of miseducation that we have when it comes to viewing cases like this and viewing situations like this and approaching it, in this way that the prosecution did is a relatively newer approach, like, even, post Me Too, of how, lawyers and how legal teams are even trying to
Oh,
go at and receive justice for victims.
okay. Sorry, I thought we were losing you there for a second, but it came that through. Listen, I mean, I want to jump on. I mean, what I'm hearing in both of your voices is this incredible frustration with the legal system. But I want to set that aside for a second and think about just the idea, the story that we've been following for a long time. I mean, since the Cassie video surfaced in 2024, and again, that's what blew this open, right up to this verdict. What I wanted to, Taryn, can you talk to me about the online discourse and like what stood out to you about how people have been discussing this trial?
A lot of it has just been plain ugly.
Mm.
I want some of these folks to just say that they hate women with their chest and move on, because that's really what they mean when, they're using this victim blaming language with Cassie and, these other accusers saying, oh, they just want money and, oh, it wasn't a problem when XYZ. Like, that again shows how deeply flawed and deeply, ignorant a lot of people are to, the pain and suffering that these victims have gone through. And I think that, like, when you listen to what they're saying, even on a human level, it doesn't add up to me how a lot of comments can be so cruel and how, folks can be outside of the courthouse post verdict dousing themselves and each other in baby oil. Unfortunately, again, it's not surprising. We've seen this kind of rallying around, Tory Lanez and R. Kelly and Bill Cosby and so many others. And it's just like the lack of empathy that is being extended for these victims is not only dark and dehumanizing, but it's just like we've become so desensitized to sexual assault and violence allegations in the worst way. And we have to do better.
I mean, and look, you just mentioned the people outside the courthouse celebrating by dousing themselves in baby oil. Baby oil, of course, being a key piece of evidence in this trial. And I think that touches a vein in terms of another aspect of the online discourse where even people who are not on Diddy's side make jokes about this. It's make jokes where they think it's okay to make jokes about Diddy, but you don't realize that's also victimizing the victims in those types of jokes. I mean, Jay, jump in here. Talk to me about this spectacle that has been built around this trial.
Yeah, I mean, it really was such a grotesque spectacle. And what was interesting to me is the vibe of some of those videos outside the courtroom. They kind of reminded me of some of the clips we saw on January 6th outside the Capitol, a similar
Mm.
sort of lunatic energy. And I don't think that's a coincidence because just like our politics are being poisoned by this whole right wing manosphere media ecosystem, on the cultural side, those people outside the courtroom are forming their worldview from a steady diet of these garbage drama channels and influencers whose whole business model is to peddle misinformation on a case like this that taps into your worst instincts and prejudices. Just like we watch people make millions of dollars from demonizing Megan Thee Stallion for 3 years, those people outside the courtroom have had an appetite for this salacious dehumanization of these women. And of course, we see them go out there and treat the whole situation like a farce. So I think it's a really telling sign of the times in a lot of ways for how unserious we are and how much of an appetite we have for hating women, like Taryn said.
That is, again, so depressing to hear all of that. And, I mean, I want to go get into another aspect of it, setting aside, again, the trial and everything, but just thinking about Diddy as someone who's had this undeniable impact on pop music, pop culture as we know it. Taryn, how do you think the split verdict then impacts his legacy moving forward?
I think a lot of his fans and a lot of folks will also be split. It will be a split decision culturally, where some folks will continue to dance to his music and Diddy Bop and do all of that, while others will boo the DJ and tell him to turn it off. But
Mm.
like bigger than music, though, we also have to consider like this is a businessman and he has been a businessman for decades. And even though he sullied his name and sits in prison now, he's still collecting a check and that won't end. He'll no longer be able to be the face of brands like Deleon and Revolt and, be the head of, these big media companies. But Diddy is savvy and well connected, and many won't want to touch him publicly, not necessarily just because of the moral aspect, but because of like, they're afraid of their reputation being hurt, which is a whole other conversation in itself. But there always will be someone who will. And I think that, of course it will not be the Diddy, the love, the rebrand that we came to know, but it will be different.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and just to add to your point, I mean, it even complicates listening to Biggie, right? Because not only is Diddy all over again the music and the videos, but also he's benefiting from that stuff. I mean, Jay, I mean, what are you thinking on that front?
I mean, my personal feeling is I don't care what happens to Diddy's legacy. I mean,
Mm.
this is not like a Dr. Dre situation where you have a genuinely great artist who made big contributions creatively and he also has an ugly history of abuse. Like, that's not who Diddy is. Diddy, I guess he ushered in the shiny suit era of vapid materialism in the music, which is like, thanks a lot. Other
That
than
part.
that, he's a megalomaniacal businessman who's really good at self-promotion and finagled his way into a lot of production credits he only halfway deserved. So as far as I'm concerned, throw that legacy away. Use AI to take him off to Biggie tracks and we can move on. The reality is, of course, he's going to be fine for all the reasons Taryn said. And really, when I think about legacy, I look at all these women who stepped up to tell their story, and I want to know, will they get to have a legacy? And that's going to be up to us with what we do to take what they did and make it count at the risk of being cheesy. I think that's what I'm more concerned with in terms of legacy.
Incredible, incredible. I mean, listen, you both gave me so much to think about in this really difficult conversation, and I appreciate you both for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's just like getting my notes in order here. Thank you again. So Jay Smooth is a veteran hip hop broadcaster and culture critic based in New York, and Taryn Finley is a journalist with Refinery 29 who's covering Sean Combs' trial in New York City. For more on the story, be sure to check out CBC News. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. So we're going to completely switch gears here to a story that's so much kinder and more tender. Take a listen to this.
The roots dig down deep into the earth. They're like the flower's mouth. They do all the drinking and eating. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should say hello. I'm Glenn. What's your name? Very nice to meet you.
That's from the pilot of Carrying Cabin, a new children's television show hosted by Beverly Glenn-Copeland. Glenn is, of course, a Canadian icon, a transgender elder, and internationally recognized as an electronic music genius. His pilot, Carrying Cabin, is now on Criterion Channel, but the first episode will also be its last due to Glenn's struggle with dementia. To talk about Carrying Cabin and Glenn's incredible legacy, we got Sarah-Tai Black. Hi, Sarah-Tai.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about Beverly Glenn and not P. Diddy.
So as we all are. And look, you've said that Beverly Glenn-Copeland is someone who makes you feel good about the world, which again is something we definitely need right now. Tell me how does he do that?
I will say that Beverly Glenn-Copeland is the only person I've ever sincerely used the phrase high vibrational about. There's something about like devoutly practicing Buddhists where like their energy just affects you and you're like, oh, like I want to be like that too. Like something has shifted. And I think that so much of their spirituality imbues their artistic practice, and their art just feels so transcendental. And that's definitely helped by the fact that it is this like transcendental electronic music, but just the way that he navigates the world, the way that he writes the lyrics, he writes like every aspect of his art practice. For me anyway, it reminds me of my place in the world. It reminds me of my connection to myself, my connection to others around me. I know that this is true for a lot of people because I've seen others cry at a Beverly Glenn-Copeland show like I have, where you just feel so seen, like directly seen in your vulnerability in a very special way that, for me anyway, I very rarely feel that. Glenn did an interview with the Globe and Mail this week in advance of Carrying Cabin, and he said that I never felt like my music came from me. I was just tuned in enough for what was beyond me to be able to come through me. And I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful encapsulation of the way that his work affects me. He feels like this tuning fork for like something better, like a world that is possible, that is waiting for us to kind of access it.
I love that description, especially the way you're exploring the connections, all the connections of the world, the connections between people, because I feel like there's a lot of that happening in this episode of Carrying Cabin, because there's so much going on, but it all feels connected and centered. Can you describe that episode for us?
Yeah, well, it was developed with his creative partner and artist activist partner, Elizabeth Glenn-Copeland, as well as producer Sean O'Neill, whose work I'm a huge, huge fan of. And the plan was to develop this children's series and kind of in the vein of like 70s children's television, where it's very gentle, it's very honest, things have kind of like a homemade feel, very like Mr. Rogers-y, aimed at younger youth audiences, like 2 to 6, but also I'm a grown up and I cried, so everyone. But in the episode itself, Glenn is kind of helping this very stressed out squirrel who can't find his friend, and he's kind of like reminding him to like calm himself through breathing and describing like how changes in our life affect one another, how folks may be there one moment, may not be there the next. And then he performs one of his beautiful, amazing songs that just had me sobbing as per usual. It's just a very beautiful, tender human offering.
Yeah, yeah. And I love, like, I mean, there's a reclamation aspect to this because, like, you know, a lot of us grew up with Glenn appearing on Mr. Dress Up in the 80s and 90s. And also, by the way, composing music for Sesame Street. But then there's this whole other side where, you know, the electronic music, which, I mean, for a long time, Glenn was making kind of like largely to not much of an audience. But then in 2016, as I understand, their self-described 1986 album was rediscovered. Can you talk to me about what happened there? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, he was, as it's been told, living in rural Ontario in the 80s, communing with nature and making this amazing synth folk album that I think he only made like 200 cassettes of. It's called Keyboard Fantasies. It's self-distributed, very much like a DIY effort. And then in 2016, this Japanese music producer, influencer, distributor, he found this cassette and it became this kind of like global phenomenon for Glenn, who was then in his 70s. Like the New York Times was writing about it. There was, of course, a documentary about that album and his work, also called Keyboard Fantasies, which is amazing. And from there, we had like the CBC in the Making episode with him. It was just this wild takeoff of a work that had existed for so long and that was now being celebrated in a way that we very rarely see people of this age, especially Black trans elders of this age, being celebrated. And it was just a very special moment.
That's very beautiful. And I mean, look, I wanted to actually bring up a quote from Glenn's wife and creative partner, Elizabeth, who recently said, and I'm going to quote it, "I don't think many people understand what Glenn sacrificed to be the advocate that he is." And that was in an interview with The Independent in Newfoundland and Labrador. Sarah-Tai, I mean, talk to me about Elizabeth's sentiment there. I mean, like, how would you describe this legacy of activism through Glenn's art? And we only have a minute left, so let me know.
I mean, I think he offers us this amazing model of possibility, and not just in terms of like living as a Black trans person, but as leading with grace and leading with this innate power of connecting with others through art. Without his music, I would feel much more alone in this world. I would feel much less hope. I think he's just an incredibly special person, not just artist. And he reminds us that Black trans folks, like we are not just our histories. We're not just these death-bound figures meant to be celebrated only in death. You know, we live, we continue to live, we continue to be rightfully celebrated.
Okay. Well, you know what? I give me just a little bit more time left. I do have to ask you one more question. I mean, Glenn, you know, we have this one episode of Caring Cabin. It's going to be our last episode, but Glenn has, because of Glenn's living with dementia, but I just wanted to know, you know, Glenn said that, you know, people talk about dementia as the end of things as opposed to in terms of the possibilities it's open. So with that in mind, can you just tell me, you know, what is it that Glenn, what are the possibilities? What does this give us, the Caring Cabin, this 11-minute episode? What is it bringing us in the world?
I think if we take the lessons that Glenn has taught us over the decades and move beyond the feeling of loss into this feeling of being grateful for this episode, you know, we can grieve Glenn as the artist we knew, but we can also celebrate the ways that these cognitive differences that he's experiencing right now are going to change his art. And that doesn't necessarily mean for the worse or for the better or anything, but in the way that cognitive issues like dementia change the way that you engage with the world around you and the world inside of yourself. And what does that mean for his art? And I think that's a possibility that we should be celebrating and forwarding right now. Amazing.
Thank you so much, Sarah-Tai. And I, you know, so glad, so happy you brought us joy into this world.
Thank you.
Sarah-Tai Black is a freelance film critic whose work shows up in the Globe and Mail and here on Commotion. You can watch Caring Cabin on the Criterion channel. There's also, by the way, in Toronto, a free screening, Q&A, and performance with Beverly and Elizabeth Glenn-Copeland at TIFF Lightbox Theater. That is this Saturday. And that is it for our show today. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We're going to have a big movie chat about how the Jurassic World franchise just won't go extinct. And we'll be telling you all about a beautiful new film called Sorry Baby, which you are absolutely going to want to tune in for. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion at any time, wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on YouTube and Instagram. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. See you tomorrow.